I hope that those institutions that are still fighting for offices of diversity, offices that support underrepresented communities, if you need to call it what you need to call it, to still offer the services, just do it, but it is important that these underrepresented communities have a place to go and are directed to the appropriate resources so that they can succeed. They are the future. These are young people we're talking about, our future of our country. And if this administration believes it's so important that we have the best, invest in the best in these LGBTQ students.
Welcome to the Queerest podcast, your cosmic guide to the queer universe. Hosted by Andraé BVR, each episode takes you on an interstellar journey through queer culture, identity, and influence. From dismantling media tropes to exploring queer representation, we invite you to challenge norms and expand your horizons. So buckle up and set your phasers to fabulous. Close encounters of the queerest kind await.
Hello, Cosmic Queers and Allies. Welcome back to the Queerest podcast. I am your host, Andraé BVR, and today we are diving into a topic that impacts so many in our community: higher education, mentorship, and the support LGBTQ plus students need to succeed. The journey for LGBTQ students in higher education is far from equal. While college should be a time of growth, many queer students face challenges like unsupportive families, financial barriers, and a lack of affirming spaces. That's where Point Foundation steps in, breaking down those barriers and helping students thrive. I'm thrilled to welcome Jorge Valencia, Executive Director of Point Foundation. Under his leadership, Point has expanded its scholarships, mentorship programs, and leadership initiatives, ensuring queer students don't just attend college, but excel in it. Before joining Point, Jorge served as president and executive director of the Trevor Project, shaping its role as a national leader in suicide prevention for LGBTQ plus youth. His impact on our community is undeniable. On a personal note, I've seen firsthand the work that Point Foundation does and how much impact it has. Today, we'll dive into Jorge's journey, the work Point Foundation is doing to create inclusive academic spaces, and how we can all support the next generation of queer leaders. Jorge, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andraé. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. So I would love to start off going a little bit into your personal journey. So as somebody who grew up in a Mormon Latino family in Texas, how did your identity as a gay man shape your journey towards advocacy? And were there any pivotal moments that led you to this work specifically?
So, yeah, I think there were a number of pivotal moments actually in my life that got me to where I am now. I've always approached, I think, my professional career from a very personal space. So what my experience was growing up, and that's usually driven me to make decisions on my career path. But way back when in the 1800s when I was born, I knew no LGBTQ person or that was out, I'll put it that way.
Right.
And so I didn't really come to terms with my own sexuality until after I left college, if you can believe that. So it was after that, and when I was living in Washington, D.C. But I will say that the struggles associated with coming from a religious background where you are taught that LGBTQ people are going to hell, that there is no space for them, and it is a mistake to be that way, one can't help but struggle in wondering, is this me? Is this my life? What's it going to do for me? And unfortunately, when someone feels pretty down, they make some drastic decisions, ill-informed decisions. And I thought that I was ready to exit this world. I really did. Thankfully, I didn't, and I surrounded myself with the people that were going to support me. But if there was something that was pivotal for me, it comes down to recognizing that there wasn't anything wrong with the way I was. And even
Yeah.
though I was encouraged to go to, conversion therapy, whatever it was, I came to that realization sitting in my car, waiting to go into a conversion therapist's office and recognizing that, you know what, there's nothing wrong with me. This is who I am.
Right.
And from there on, I started to make decisions that really were part of my background and were going to impact what I thought, would be helpful in my life. And that's how I started at the Trevor Project and eventually landed at Point Foundation.
That's amazing. Yeah. And in all fairness, I did not come out till after college too. So very relatable content there. So I appreciate that. You mentioned the Trevor Project, and I would love to actually talk about that. You served as the president and executive director of the Trevor Project. What led you to take on that specific role, and how did it shape your perspective on LGBTQ youth support?
So my husband, Sean, was we weren't married then, but we were dating, in fact, and he was volunteering time at the Trevor Project. They were like in their third year of existence. They're very, very young organization. They would do one event a year that would fund the helpline that was being contracted out, mind you. And he invited me to go to this event with him. There were probably like 100 people, if that, and it was more of a comedy show than anything else. And
Yeah.
worked with him. And I remember sitting in the audience. I remember that Ellen DeGeneres was in the audience, and there were, just some fun people in there. But it was a comedy show, was to celebrate life. And I remember being like just in tears from laughing one minute and tears of sorrow the very next, hearing the statistics,
Yeah.
knowing that I could have been one of those statistics. So when that event was over, it had been their most successful event to date. And they had enough money that they were either going to hire an assistant to just keep things moving, or they were going to hire an executive director. And I remember telling Sean that if he was okay with me submitting my resume, and I did, they took a chance on me. And for about 5.5 years, I had the pleasure of serving as the executive director of the Trevor Project.
That's amazing. That's so cool that you were literally, in the audience of an event that they were putting on, and then you ended up being pulled into the organization to lead. I think that's so cool. And obviously with the Trevor Project, suicide prevention remains a critical issue for the organization and just overall an issue for a lot of LGBTQ youth. From your time at the Trevor Project though, like what lessons have you carried forward about the mental health challenges queer students face, particularly in the academic space?
Yeah. It's interesting because you almost have to go back. When I think about Point Foundation's mission to support students that identify as members of the LGBTQ community that are looking for post-secondary education, you have to go back to the experiences of LGBTQ people in junior high and high school, and even as young as elementary school. But I definitely have some numbers that sadly still remain when it comes to LGBTQ students in high school. So about a third of LGBTQ students drop out of high school, and that's simply to escape the violence, the harassment, and isolation that they face there. And that's 3 times the national average. So it's very, very high among LGBTQ students. And probably no surprise that if that's your experience in high school, of course, they're twice as likely to report that they're not going to go to post-secondary education. And so it impacts their earning ability, their life, their, a number of ways that it impacts them. And because of the harassment, the bullying, it impacts their grades. So now you have a student who just wanted to go to high school to get an education like all of their non-LGBTQ peers, to have a better way of life, to fulfill their dreams of a profession, and those are being stopped because of external factors from homophobia and bullying and harassment.
Yeah.
So the reason Point Foundation exists, it's to help young people in whatever post-secondary education path they have. Many of them have to go to community college to
Yep.
get their grades up. They're not competitive at a four-year institution. And so sadly, that still exists. But here, Andre, is where it gets just as bad. So let's say you make it through all of that.
Right.
You manage to graduate, you were okay, you get admitted to a four-year institution, and yet you get to this institution only to find out that it's not the welcoming haven you once expected. And
Yeah.
here are some interesting numbers to consider as well here. When you look at students in college, okay,
Mhm.
they report that they're twice as likely to receive unfair treatment from administrators, staff, and non-LGBTQ peers. They're
Wow.
3 times as likely to report poor mental health. So it goes right back to this, Andre, about the mental health and Trevor. It doesn't stop, once they leave high school.
Right.
Sadly, it goes on past.
Yeah. It's incredible. And I think like it's really a systemic issue. Our society, the homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all of that, like school is just kind of the vehicle in which people are experiencing that level of discrimination and hatred and harassment. And it just continues, even outside of, higher education. But it's definitely difficult, and it can, affect the mental health and they suffer, academically. And I think that it's really important the work that Point Foundation is doing to, support students who are going through higher education. And I would love to kind of talk now a little bit more about Point Foundation and kind of unpack the biggest challenges that LGBTQ students face. We talked a little bit about the mental health challenges, but want to know like what other challenges they face, whether it's, financial, social, or institutional barriers that they encounter as they kind of go through their higher education experience.
Of course. Financial's the number one, Andre. I think that's why most students seek scholarships. The cost of education is horrific,
Yeah.
and it makes it very difficult for someone who doesn't have family support or community support
Yeah.
to afford a post-secondary education. It's just insurmountable for many to figure out how they're going to get there. So that's one. That's a big one.
Huge
And,
one.
and then when you consider that some parents still count their child, in terms of getting a tax write-off or whatever, and yet that child is being rejected by their parents, and they're not eligible then for any sort of funding because of that, because they say your parents make too much money. That
Right.
becomes an issue. They don't know where to go. So that's a big part. Another challenge that they face is also with community. And
Yeah.
when you look at the environment right now, when you look at what happened, just 3 years ago with the Supreme Court, and now you're looking at the executive orders that just came out in the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
you begin to get a sense of how important community is. And yet, DEI and Pride offices across the country are getting shut down on university campuses, at corporations. So it continues. And the question is, where do I go as a student for community? And it
Yeah.
is something that Point Foundation does provide. It's a community for the young people that we support.
Absolutely. And I would love for you to kind of unpack how, there's sometimes the issue of community, there's the financial aspects of it, but I would love for you to kind of tap into like institutional barriers and how students kind of navigate that, in facing maybe discrimination.
Yeah. Well, you heard me mention earlier some of the statistics around unfair treatment on college campuses. And then if they have intersecting identities, if you happen to be a person of color and transgender, for example, then that even gets more challenging for students So they experience even more mental health issues. So, for example, 45% of transgender students who are also students of color report being more depressed and feelings of desperation compared to only 18% of white LGBTQ students. So it's that much more difficult. But I think, look, I live in a bubble sometimes in Los Angeles. You feel the safety of community at times, and even then, it's not always that safe. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to consider that I think we've gotten to a place where people feel safe, and and we shouldn't, frankly, because that's not always the case. You could have a neighbor that isn't, and so
Yeah.
I think someone's always trying to figure out how to navigate the environment. But we see rainbow flags, we see people in our community, and if we're in a particular pocket, we feel that safety there, and that's a good feeling. Don't get me wrong, but when you have 30% of transgender students reporting that they don't have access to gender affirming bathrooms on their campuses, I mean, and that's a basic human right that they don't
Yeah.
even have access to on their campuses, or that 40% of LGBTQ students with disabilities say that they're being left out of activities and events. We've got a long way to go when it comes to how we support students. So if there is if there is a challenge, I think, for institutions of post-secondary education, is how do you navigate the current environment of this anti-DEI movement
Yeah.
towards people of color, towards immigrants, towards undocumented, towards LGBTQ people? How do you navigate that and still provide a safe environment of learning? You know, and that's where we hope that our students, through the support that we give them and mentoring, and frankly, through the support of our community and allies, that we can get to a place that they will be able to graduate successfully and go on to make changes in their communities.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I'm curious. Obviously, Point Foundation, has a lot of different programs, and they provide scholarships, but it also provides mentorship opportunities and leadership development. So why would you say, in your opinion, mentorship is a crucial part of student success, especially for LGBTQ plus individuals?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of people wonder, because of maybe some of the progress that we have made over the last few years. It seems to be going in the wrong direction, but over the last few years, people probably see that and wonder. But I'll tell you, Andre, that even the most accepting of families, somebody that embraces their child for who they are, their identity, even so, they don't often know about our history as members of the LGBTQ community.
Right.
They haven't navigated what it's like to ask someone out of the same sex and what their family may say or feel, or the religious component on
Yeah.
top of that. And then you get to campus and don't know how to navigate staff on campus, or administrators, or educators. And so for us at Point Foundation, it has always been important that we put them in a group with individuals that can help them navigate a number of different areas,
Yeah.
and people that have been there before. We have now a group mentoring model because 88% of our students identify as people of color, over 54% identify as first generation. And we find that a group mentoring format is a lot safer for people to talk and communicate and exchange ideas and advice.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that they're able to see in adults, understand how they navigated situations, and really have a sounding board more than anything else.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, I can speak from my experience having been a mentor to through Point Foundation. And I could see the impact of how much it helped my scholar succeed. They were so grateful to be able to, speak candidly and ask questions and kind of unpack issues that they're experiencing in higher education. And, for those out there who are interested in being a mentor, Point Foundation would be a great place to do that and to make, significant impact in LGBTQ youth's lives and their overall success. I think that mentorship is so powerful, and being able to have an ally and an advocate, there to support you, it means so much. And I think, for me as a mentor, I am so grateful for all the things that I learned from my mentee about how best to support them, and to understand that every scholar has a unique story with unique challenges, and it's really about making sure that you're showing up in the way that is most meaningful to them. Yeah. And I thank you for that program. I think that was amazing, truly.
Thank you for being a mentor. And Andraé, you probably heard this or you got this, but I know that often our scholars, and it's a generation, by the way, that I'm so grateful for, because they're unapologetic in who they are as individuals. They're embracing the fact that this is who I am. These are my identities, and I want to show up in an authentic manner. And yet, we know that when one starts going into a professional work environment, that there are different ways in which to approach that. And you might have gotten this, but many of our mentors say that they often hear, how can I be true to who I am and show up at the office without feeling that I'm going to be rejected or harassed by folks? I mean, right. In my generation, the big thing was, don't talk about what you did this weekend. You can't say you went to a gay bar, or right. You can't put up a picture of your partner because of the scrutiny that it would bring on. But the mentors are able to do so much of that, and I thank you for supporting that program.
Absolutely. No, I'm so grateful for my mentee, Pau. Shout out to you. You're amazing. So obviously, beyond tuition costs, like many LGBTQ students struggle with housing insecurity, a lack of family support, like we mentioned, and obviously mental health challenges, as we spoke about before. How does Point Foundation address those intersecting issues?
First and foremost, we're a scholarship organization, and our primary goal is threefold. One, let's get the financial resources to LGBTQ students so they can get into school and get their degree. The mentorship component of it, we hope, addresses some of the need for community, especially at a time like this. Right. We have conferences as well. So every other year we have an in-person conference. We have a number of virtual conferences. We have some career exposure programs as well. And so the whole idea is really helping to set up our scholars for success through some of these programs. So we hope to achieve that through our mentoring program and some of our leadership training programs. The other part, which is the broader one, really is this sense of community. And for people that can look different, somebody would prefer a one-on-one conversation. We also have someone on staff that works with student advocacy. And so they're there to help a scholar navigate their college environment. We don't give advice on a number of things because it's not our mission, it's not our lane. Right. But they know how to help that student find those resources either on campus or in their area. And right. So that's the way we try to approach our support of students along the way.
That's fantastic. I think that's so important, just because I think students it's an overwhelming experience going into higher education, especially for first generation students, that the process can be a lot to take on all at once, on top of dealing with the complexities around understanding yourself and kind of coming into your identity. That like being able to have an organization like Point Foundation with the various resources and programs that it has can make that process so much more not necessarily seamless, but it definitely, improves that experience for them, and they feel more empowered to succeed and strive for whatever goals they're trying to, go after. So I think that's fantastic. So I would love to chat a little bit about like the impact of Point Foundation, because it's very clear that Point Foundation has touched so many lives and all of the work that it does to support LGBTQ students. Has there been any stories of Point scholars, or just generally speaking, just scholars in general, that has stood out to you and how they've overcome adversity and used their education in, really meaningful ways, whether it's local impact or, even national, if that's the case?
After being here 18 years, let me tell you, it's like I've seen a lot of scholars go through, become alumni, and they become board members at Point Foundation. Really, really impressive. I often say, and not in a joking way, that if Point Foundation had existed when I was around, there's no way I would have been selected, because these young people are brilliant, and against all odds, there's a common thread among the individuals that we support is their grit, their desire to make life better for others,
Yeah.
themselves along the way. But that it's that they have from somewhere that it comes out, and there are a lot of stories. It's interesting that you raised the word impact, because we've struggled internally with that word,
Mhm.
because it can mean so much to so
Yeah.
many different people. It can mean a lot, and it can vary from individual to individual. And I
Right.
remember us going through this exercise saying, what is impact? Like, is impact somebody that's in a very visible position? Is it someone that is in an elementary school room teaching young people and being out as an individual that they know it's okay if I'm out, or if I am LGBTQ, because I can go on to achieve my dreams and wherever that may be. Maybe it's a large
Right.
media, following, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's making impact at home. And I'll tell you this: some of our scholars, many of our first generation and BIPOC students, have multiple jobs in order to get to school. And that's part of the reason why we exist, to alleviate some of that there. But for them, they go to work, they go to school, they go back to work, they come home, they help their siblings
Yeah.
with their homework while their parents at work. And Andre, to us, that is impact.
Yeah.
That is immeasurable impact in many ways. We don't know what that tutoring of that younger sibling will do for them in the future. But yeah, there are some visible folks for sure that bring some attention, and rightfully so. So we have a Point alum named Julian Brees, one of our first scholars, in fact, and he co-wrote the Academy Award nominated film Rustin with Dustin Lance Black.
Oh, I love that
And
one.
yes, and he's just a phenomenal person in the entertainment industry. We have an alum, Alexia Korberg, who defended our rights at the highest court in the country, not once, but twice, and I think maybe even three times, with the US versus Windsor case. And the most
Yep.
recent one was Dobb versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. Didn't go the way many had hoped. And
Right.
Alexia just left the law practice, if you would, to be the executive director of an organization called Her Justice. Alexia sits on our board as well, so doing some amazing work with Point Foundation. And then we have a member of our educational advisory board, an alum, Bridget Davis, who's a first generation college graduate, a professor at UMass Amherst, and has been awarded not one, but two at least prestigious mentoring awards, and has now their mentee who's now mentoring others. And so consider that impact there alone, and how it's like continuing to pay it forward. I remember that I read that Bridget was the youngest to receive that award. And in Bridget's words, saying this is evidence again of Point's rippling impact moving forward. And so those are just three. I could go on and on about people that are in the courtroom, that are doctors, that are educators, that are in the film and arts industry. They're everywhere. And yeah, I'm excited about what they're going to continue doing for our country.
Yeah, that's amazing. It truly is like creating the next generation of queer leaders in our country. And I love the way that you kind of unpacked the scale of impact that Point Foundation does, whether it's enabling someone to contribute to their family's livelihood, to having sometimes national impact on the work that they're doing. I think that speaks to the work that Point Foundation does, your leadership, and just the community that has been created around this organization and how affirming and empowering it can be. I think it's incredible, truly. And I congratulate you and the team for all of the work that y'all do consistently day in and day out to make that possible for LGBTQ youth and the future of our community, truly.
In the last few years, we really came to a place as an organization where we wanted to expand our scholarship programs because it was very important for us to meet LGBTQ people on their journey to post-secondary education. That is what prompted us to go into community college, because initially the organization was started just supporting undergraduate and graduate students.
Right.
And then we got funding, and we're going to be rolling this out very soon. But we got funding a year ago to start supporting individuals that were seeking a cosmetology license.
Amazing.
But now we have funding to roll out a full vocational and trade school scholarship.
That's
and when
amazing.
you talk about like having an impact, I often think about good old gay George, who didn't know a lick about cars. And my dad's like, go get the oil changed. And so nervous to walk into a mechanic shop for fear of saying the wrong thing or them not saying, why can't you do it? For Point Foundation, and I think it's important for our community as a whole, we want to see ourselves succeed and thrive in every profession, no matter what it is. So very excited about that program. And I hope that there are many individuals that are seeking some level of support to get, certification, are looking to Point in the future.
That's amazing. That's huge. Again, every time I check in with somebody from Point Foundation, there's like a new program like rolling out and more scholarships are being added to programs. And it keeps growing. And I think it's because of how impactful the work is and how, supportive the community around Point Foundation is. And obviously the great work that this Point Foundation staff is doing. So I think that's amazing. I love to see that program come to life. That's awesome. I would love to now kind of shift a little bit and kind of look at it from a macro perspective around kind of the current landscape. Obviously, in the face of growing political and legislative challenges targeting LGBTQ rights, particularly in education, how do we continue to advocate for queer students' access to safe and inclusive learning environments?
That's a great question. I almost wish you weren't asking it, right? But the truth is that it is important to ask. It is important to address. And for us at Point Foundation, it's important to understand how our scholars are feeling at any given point. So I'll just give you some quick numbers here. After the election, we wanted to get a sense of what our scholars were feeling. We wanted to make sure that they knew we were here for them, that we'll always be here for them. So we asked 6 simple questions. This was right after the election. Mm-hmm. We have sent these same 6 questions recently, and it'll be interesting to see what we hear back from our scholars given the new administration and what we're hearing. Right. One of the questions that we asked was, as an LGBTQ and or a BIPOC individual, And we asked them, we posed the question, I feel less safe now than I did a year ago. We asked whether they strongly disagreed, they disagreed, neither nor agreed or strongly agreed. And 83% agreed or strongly agreed that they feel less safe in November than they did a year ago. We asked about feelings of anxiety, if they're feeling more that now than before, and close to 75% said that that was the case. When we asked about whether they believed their rights as an LGBTQ individual were currently at risk, 90% said that they did agree or disagree that they were more at risk, their rights as LGBTQ individuals. I mean, you've seen those articles. I mean, people are running to go get married before the administration came on, right? I mean, they're nervous about that. We asked protections about themselves, their families, their partners, if because of immigration protections, and 91.5% said that they were concerned about the protections for themselves, their families, their partners, or friends, that those should be reduced or eliminated. We're seeing that happening all over the place right now with the raids. And then, so those are the type of questions that we asked. We are very concerned for our students. We're very concerned for the type of support that they should be getting, but unfortunately aren't receiving. And so I hope that those institutions that are still fighting for offices of diversity, offices that support underrepresented communities, if you need to call it what you need to call it, to still offer the services, just do it, but it is important that these underrepresented communities have a place to go and are directed to the appropriate resources so that they can succeed. They are the future. These are young people we're talking about, our future of our country. And if this administration believes it's so important that we have the best, invest in the best in these LGBTQ students. I mean, truthfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like in general, it's like to not invest in a segment of the youth, I think is so destructive, counterintuitive to the success of the country. Like it only behooves us to be able to make sure that every student has access to the resources they need to survive and thrive, whether it's in higher education or not. And for this administration to kind of take the opinion that, this segment of the population doesn't deserve those resources for, whatever arbitrary reasons that they have, I think is only hurting the overall success of what our country can really do. And I think that, it's disappointing. It's disheartening. And I every day it seems like there's something new happening, but it's about our community coming together and to be, resilient amongst all of the chaos and turmoil, and, having organizations like Point Foundation to have that source of community, to have, an organization that checks in on you about what's happening in the current landscape, I think is so important. And I think, not having that sense of community for, thousands, millions of LGBTQ people across the country is hard. So for the students that are able to, be a part of the Point Foundation community, I think it really allows them to succeed even amongst all of the chaos that they're experiencing. So I want to take a look into the future a little bit right now. Sure. So long term here, Point Foundation has done, fantastic work. In your opinion, what would you what would you envision for the future of LGBTQ inclusion within academia, let's say 10 years from now? And what would that look like? And what role do you hope Point Foundation can play in shaping that future?
That's a good, lofty question. May I be around long enough to see the future, but I'll tell you, if there's anything I'd like to see is not see the statistics I just read off to you. I would like the idea that only 30%, that 30% of, transgender students saying that they don't have gender affirming bathrooms. I'd like to see that wiped away completely. I'm always, I guess, pleasantly surprised, I have to say, when I walk into a corporate environment and I see gender neutral bathrooms everywhere.
Yeah.
And, even in some of the more conservative states in the United States that you see that commitment from corporations, that makes somebody feel included, but I think that what I often
Yeah.
hear, or what people often use as an excuse for dismantling programs, is that we're creating a wedge. We're actually segregating folks, and we're creating more of a wedge between communities when you have these particular offices. But the truth is, and you mentioned this earlier, you know, discrimination has existed in this country. It's founded in that, in that way.
Yeah.
And there are times that you need to be with your own just to recharge your battery. It's, if you've probably heard this, Andre, in some way, but I'm first generation Mexican. My parents were both from Mexico, and the number of times that I get people making comments because it's like, oh, well, you're tall for a Mexican, or you don't look like a Mexican, or you're different.
Right.
Like, I don't even know how to take that.
Right.
Do they mean that as a compliment? Because it's actually quite offensive when you hear it
Yeah.
that way. And there are times that you want to be in a room with people that know where you come from, understand, and it allows one to sit back, recharge, so that you can be patient as you hope to educate others on what it means to be a person with different identities. My hope is that educational institutions will continue to invest in educating their staff, their administrators, their professors on inclusive practices, on making sure that resources are available to students of all different identities. And then that would mean, like, how wonderful would it be if we didn't have to worry about that because it was ingrained in what a proper education was. That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And higher education has always been a space for social change, as we know. And I really put Point Foundation up there in being a huge contributor to the success and future of our community. I think like organizations like Point Foundation do that. And I'm curious, like, what role, in your opinion, do you feel like Point Foundation plays in the broader LGBTQ rights movement? Because it does play a huge role, in my opinion, and I would love for your opinion on that.
We spoke about this last week. We had a senior staff retreat, and we talked about the environment that we're in, and all of us as human beings, whether you're a member of the LGBTQ community or an ally, the desire to do something, and what does that look like? And we talked about the importance of us staying in our lane. There are, as a volunteer, as a member of society in our community, my goodness, volunteer, donate your time to anything that speaks to you. It could be immigration rights. It could be Planned Parenthood, that you want to protect reproductive rights. It could be any number of things. But I think for Point Foundation, it's going to be very important to stay in our lane and stay razor focused on what we do. If there's something that I have learned from administrations that come and go, is how it's easy to stir the pot in a way that throws everyone off balance.
Mm-hmm.
And then no one knows where to go. It's almost like, doing this to a pot and everything just kind of scrambles.
Yep.
And we have a very unique place in our community, and that is to prepare the future, the leaders that are going to be protecting our rights in every place possible, every field imaginable. That is our lane, to be visible, and to make sure that people know that there is a path to that success in whatever career path somebody chooses. And so we'll continue to let the Trevor Project do the wonderful work that they do. We'll support HRC in their efforts to protect our rights. And I respect that they will support us in our efforts to help young people with a post-secondary education.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get into some compulsory questions. These are very light, lightning round. You can answer with just the answer, or if you want to add a little context, please do so. The first question I have for you is, what is your go-to queer anthem that never fails to get you pumped?
I wish it were my husband answering that question, because he is so good about that. And to him, it's any Whitney Houston song, frankly. So that was my first concert I ever attended. I'll probably go with anything Whitney works for me.
I love it. Whitney's fantastic, and she's always our queen. I love that. So if your identity came with a warning label, what would it say?
Oh my God. I'm a Taurus. Be careful. I don't know. It's like,
I love that.
No one wants to be in a relationship with a Taurus. No, thank God my husband does.
That's amazing. Next question. If you had a queer superpower, what would it be?
The ability to change people's minds.
Ooh, I like that.
If somebody was thinking, I'm gonna say something bad, I could read their mind enough to change it and it would not come out.
I love that. No, that's great. I think that's a great one. Next question. What is your favorite piece of queer content? And that's kind of inclusive of like film, music, books, podcast, anything that you've read recently that really stuck out to you. Like, what is something that you would want the Queerest community to check out?
You know, I watch so many films. I've been on this kick, and it's been about audiobooks. And it's like, I had a goal last year to read one a month. I actually did 26 of them when I'm walking, and just saw all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to say two films that really impacted me deeply. It was Brokeback Mountain. It sounds cliche. I get it.
It's great though.
But it was the first time on the screen that I saw a segment of folks that exist, because I grew up in Texas with cowboys that could not express who they were. And to see the tragedy of not being able to live together, that really impacted me. And then the other one was Call Me by Your Name, the one, because seeing the hurt in that young person who was so in love, that I think many of us, when we were finally out, were experiencing love for the very first time at a much older age. And those feelings are very different when you're experiencing it as your authentic self for the first time. Those are pretty awesome for me.
Yeah, those are fantastic choices. I love those. And then the last one, if you could give your young self a piece of advice, what would you say?
Be patient with yourself. I wish I'd been more patient with myself and not constantly, knock myself down for who I was, because I was different. If I'd been more patient with myself, I would hope that the result would have been that I'd been very, very proud of my identity as a gay Latino Mormon from Texas.
I love that. That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, that concludes the compulsory questions. George, thank you so much for sharing your journey, all of the incredible work that you and Point Foundation do on the daily, and your leadership that has helped so many LGBTQ plus students not just find academic success, but a sense of belonging and empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I am very fortunate to work with a wonderful team and a wonderful board of directors that really do allow us to do anything in our power to help more students. And to any of your listeners, check us out. Look at pointfoundation.org, go to our website. There's so many ways to get involved, to get, support if you're planning on going to, school. And thank you, Andraé, for being such a wonderful example to our scholars and for the opportunities that you've given us. Thank you.
Of course. And on a broader scale, obviously education is much more than just acquiring knowledge. It's about finding your place in the world. LGBTQ students deserve environments that they can fully be themselves, where they're celebrated and where they can get the support to reach their full potential. And, when we invest in our queer students, like Point Foundation does, we're investing in a future where our community thrives in every field, at every level, and every corner of our society. So for my listeners out there, please continue to advocate for inclusive, equitable spaces that uplift and empower the next generation of LGBTQ leaders. And again, George, thank you so much for your time. It was a fantastic conversation. And again, check out pointfoundation.org for more information. They are an incredible organization doing some amazing work to support the next generation. Thank you again, George.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Queerest podcast. Thank you for joining us on this cosmic journey through the queer universe. If today's conversation resonated with you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your chosen family. Your voice helps grow the Queerest community. Until next time, stay curious.